At 34 years old, Adrien Broner, once billed as the next Floyd Mayweather, has finally opened up about a night in his career that he says changed everything. Fans remember his rise, the flashy knockouts, the 4-weight world titles, the millions earned before 25. But Broner says there's one fight, one night, that hides a truth he's never spoken about until now. A story involving betrayal, mental strain, and behind-the-scenes moves that could change how we see his career forever. And the most shocking part? You've already seen the fight, but never like this. Before the bright lights, million-dollar purses, and pay-per-view spotlights, Adrien Broner's story began on the rough streets of Cincinnati, Ohio. Born on July 28, 1989, in a working-class neighborhood, Broner grew up in a city where boxing wasn't just a sport. For some, it was a lifeline. His father, Thomas Knight, recognized early that his son had two options: fall into the traps of street life or find a discipline that could give him structure and purpose. At just 6 years old, Broner was introduced to the boxing gym. The air smelled of sweat and leather, and the sound of gloves smacking heavy bags became part of his childhood soundtrack. The neighborhood around him wasn't forgiving. Violence, crime, and drugs were an everyday reality, and young Adrien saw firsthand how quickly life could spiral for those who took the wrong path. His father made sure the gym was where Adrien spent most of his free time. That's where the boy who would become the problem learned his craft, long before the cameras, long before the headlines. From the start, Broner had an edge to him. In sparring, he wasn't just trying to win, he was trying to dominate. Trainers recall a confidence bordering on arrogance even at a young age, but that swagger had roots in survival. He needed to believe he was untouchable, because outside those gym walls, showing vulnerability could be dangerous. By his teenage years, Broner had amassed an impressive amateur record, racking up wins across the Midwest and earning a reputation as a slick, sharp counterpuncher. His style was influenced by the legend Floyd Mayweather Jr., Pernell Whitaker, and Sugar Ray Leonard, but with his own brash twist. He talked big because he planned to back it up, and most of the time, he did. Still, even in these early days, Broner's story wasn't just about talent. There were already signs that his path would be as turbulent as it was promising. The same confidence that fueled his success would also set the stage for some of the most controversial moments of his career. And as he would reveal years later, those early lessons about trust, loyalty, and survival would come rushing back to him on the night of a fight that still haunts him today. Adrien Broner turned professional in 2008, bringing the same swagger from his amateur days into the paid ranks. His debut was explosive, a first-round technical knockout that announced him as a fighter to watch. Over the next few years, Broner tore through opponents with a mix of blistering hand speed, pinpoint accuracy, and a defensive style reminiscent of his idol, Floyd Mayweather Jr. He didn't just win fights, he styled on his opponents, making them miss and then making them pay. The boxing world took notice. Broner was marketable, young, brash, talented, and unafraid to stir controversy. By 2011, he had captured his first world title at super featherweight. His star only rose from there. He moved up to lightweight, claimed another belt, and then jumped divisions again, winning titles at super lightweight and welterweight. By the time he was 23, he was a 3-division world champion. Not long after, he'd add a 4th title, joining a select group of boxers to win championships in 4 weight classes. The media labeled him the next Floyd Mayweather, and Broner leaned into the comparison. He embraced the flashy persona, stepping into the ring with rappers performing live walkouts, flaunting jewelry, and delivering post-fight interviews that went viral. His motto, AB, about billions, wasn't just a catchphrase, it was a brand. But behind the scenes, the pace was relentless. The jump between weight classes took a toll, physically and mentally. Training camps became as much about shedding pounds as honing skills. While Broner's talent was undeniable, whispers began to surface. Questions about his discipline, his focus, and whether the fame was pulling him away from the grind that had built him. Still, in the public eye, he was unstoppable. Every victory felt like a step closer to the throne Mayweather would eventually vacate. But boxing history is full of meteoric rises followed by sudden falls, And for Broner, the fight that would shift his trajectory from future legend to cautionary tale was already on the horizon. Years later, he'd admit that what happened around that fight wasn't just about boxing. It was about trust, manipulation, and a system that doesn't always play fair. In December 2013, Adrien Broner faced Maidana in what was supposed to be a showcase fight, a chance to solidify his place as one of the sport's biggest stars. Broner was undefeated, the reigning WBA welterweight champion, and heavily favored by oddsmakers. Maidana, a rugged Argentine brawler, was seen as a tough but beatable opponent. From the opening bell, the fight did not go as scripted. Maidana came out aggressive, winging heavy punches and pressing Broner in a way few had dared. In the second round, a looping left hook dropped Broner for the first time in his career. The crowd erupted, sensing they were witnessing something unexpected. Broner got up, but the tone was set. Maidana wasn't there to play a role in someone else's highlight reel. Throughout the fight, Maidana's relentless pressure smothered Broner's counterpunching rhythm. In the eighth round, another crushing hook sent Broner to the canvas again. Though he fought back and lasted the distance, the decision was clear. Maidana had won convincingly. The scorecards read unanimously for the challenger. Broner left the ring in shock, skipping the post-fight interview and walking out with a mix of disbelief and humiliation. In the days after, the loss went viral. Social media was ruthless, replaying the knockdowns and mocking the man who had built his brand on being untouchable. For the first time in his professional career, Broner's confidence, the armor he had worn since childhood, was visibly cracked. Years later, Broner would reveal that Maidana wasn't the only force working against him that night. While he wouldn't name names immediately, he hinted that certain people in his own circle had let him down in ways that went far beyond strategy or preparation. He suggested that what happened before and during that fight was a lesson in betrayal, a lesson he'd carry with him into every fight afterward. And as the story he'd been hiding for years began to take shape, it became clear that Maidana was only part of the picture. The real story was still waiting to be told. After the Maidana loss, Adrien Broner was still one of boxing's most recognizable names, but the aura of invincibility was gone. Instead of fading quietly, he doubled down on his persona, louder, flashier, more defiant. His social media accounts became a constant source of headlines, from stacks of cash laid out on hotel beds to wild, unpredictable videos that blurred the line between showmanship and self-destruction. The boxing world was divided. Some saw him as a marketing genius who knew how to stay relevant in an unforgiving sport. Others saw a fighter losing discipline, relying on controversy instead of consistent performance. Legal issues began to pile up. Arrests for alleged assaults, disputes in nightclubs, and lawsuits over unpaid debts. These incidents, whether proven or dismissed, fed the public image of Broner as a talented fighter spiraling out of control. Yet, despite the noise, he still landed major fights. Big names still wanted to share the ring with him because his presence guaranteed media coverage and ticket sales. Promoters knew a Broner fight meant attention, even if the storyline was messy. But that constant demand also meant he was rarely given the luxury of a carefully planned career rebuild. The pressure to take high-profile fights, whether he was fully prepared or not, was relentless. Training camps became inconsistent. At times, he showed flashes of the focused, disciplined fighter from his early years, locking in on strategy and conditioning. Other times, camp was interrupted by distractions, weight struggles, or friction with his team. There was always the sense that Broner was fighting more than just his opponent. He was battling the chaos in his own life. And within that chaos, one fight began to stand out in his memory. Not because of the opponent's skill or the result on paper, but because of the strange atmosphere around it. Backstage tension, unexplained changes to arrangements, and subtle signals that, in Broner's mind, suggested the fight wasn't going to be decided purely in the ring. He wouldn't talk about it then. In fact, he wouldn't talk about it for years. But when he finally did, it would become unclear why this night still haunted him. The build-up to the fight in question began with complications. Negotiations were drawn out and tense. Broner's team argued over purse splits, opponent selection, and contract terms. There were whispers of clauses that favored the other side, rematch guarantees, venue control, even subtle language about referee and judge assignments. From the outside, fans saw the usual pre-fight theatrics, press conferences full of trash talk, intense stare-downs, and Broner playing the role of agitator. But behind closed doors, he noticed little things that didn't add up. Phone calls from people he barely knew, offering advice about how to approach the fight. Media narratives suddenly shifting, painting him as a man on the decline, even before the first punch had been thrown. At the weigh-in, the tension spiked. His opponent made comments that seemed oddly specific, almost as if he knew details from Broner's camp that should have been private. Broner laughed it off in front of the cameras, but later admitted it got under his skin. "It was like he knew what I was gonna do before I did it," he said years later. Training camp had been rocky too. Sparring partners left without explanation. A minor injury forced him to adjust his preparation, and certain strategic decisions, like the choice of gloves or ring size, ended up being made by people outside his inner circle. Broner, always suspicious by nature, started wondering how much control he really had over his own fight. Still, fight week went ahead. The posters were up, the media obligations fulfilled, and the venue was packed. But Broner couldn't shake the feeling that something about this event was scripted. He didn't mean fake punches or outright fixing, but a sense that too many elements were already aligned in one direction. In his mind, this wasn't going to be a fair fight, and on the night itself, that suspicion only grew stronger. Fight day for Adrien Broner usually followed a set rhythm: light morning workout, rest, a carefully timed meal, then the slow build toward the walkout. But from the moment he arrived at the venue, the rhythm was broken. Security was unusually tight, with access points blocked and movement in the backstage area restricted. Broner and his team were escorted directly to a locker room that felt more isolated than usual. As he began wrapping his hands, officials entered repeatedly, not his usual inspectors, but new faces he didn't recognize. They checked the wraps, rechecked them, and then asked him to redo them, citing protocol. The interruptions broke his focus. Then came a conversation that stuck with him. A well-dressed figure, someone connected enough to be backstage, but not part of his team, stepped in and told him, "Give the people a good show tonight. You know how it goes." The words were vague, but the delivery made Broner pause. It wasn't encouragement. It sounded like expectation. His warm-up was interrupted twice more. Once for a last-minute TV check, and once for another official to go over fight instructions he'd already heard earlier in the week. His trainer kept telling him to stay locked in, but Broner could feel his focus splintering. Something about the energy in the room was wrong. On the walk to the ring, that feeling didn't fade. The crowd was loud, the lights blinding, but his mind kept circling back to those subtle signals. The comments, the changes, the unfamiliar faces. He wondered if he was walking into a fight that had already been mapped out by forces beyond his control. He wouldn't speak about that feeling afterward, not in the post-fight presser, not in interviews, not even to close friends outside his circle. But years later, when he finally broke his silence, he admitted that the fight that night was never just about the man in front of him. It was about the unseen hands shaping what would happen, and it was that realization, more than the punches thrown, that stayed with him. When the opening bell rang that night, Adrien Broner stepped forward with his usual sharp jab, but something in his demeanor was different. He wasn't grinning at his opponent or jawing back at the crowd. His focus was tight, but his movements seemed just a beat more cautious than usual. His opponent came out aggressive, firing combinations early and trying to establish dominance. Normally, Broner thrived on making opponents miss and then punishing them. This time, though, his rhythm was disrupted. In the first round, the referee issued a warning to Broner for what looked like a standard clinch, a call that seemed unnecessary to anyone watching closely. It wouldn't be the last time. In the second round, after Broner landed a clean right hand, the referee stepped in to break the action for a supposed low blow that replays later showed was nowhere near illegal. The interruptions kept coming, halting any momentum Broner tried to build. By the middle several rounds, the pattern was clear. Anytime Broner got into his groove, either the ref or the flow of the fight shifted in ways that seemed to favor his opponent. His corner could be heard telling him to stay calm and don't give them a reason, which only fueled his suspicion that they were aware of the same strange energy he was feeling. Between rounds, Broner asked outright, "What's going on here?" His trainer told him to just fight through it, but the answer didn't satisfy him. The later rounds were competitive, with both men landing solid shots. Broner tried to rally in the championship rounds, pushing the pace and landing cleaner punches, but when the final bell rang, he didn't raise his hands or celebrate. He just stared across the ring as if trying to read something in the other fighter's face. The decision was red. A close fight on the cards, but not in Broner's favor. The crowd reacted with a mix of cheers and boos, but Broner's expression barely changed. He left the ring quickly, not sticking around for a post-fight interview, and disappeared into the locker room. Years later, when Adrien Broner finally decided to speak openly, he didn't name every name, but he didn't hold back on the situation. In an interview, he admitted that before that fight, he was approached by individuals he described as connected to the business side, who made it clear they had expectations for the bout. According to Broner, the message was that the fight needed to be entertaining, competitive, and good for business. On the surface, those might sound like harmless suggestions, but to him, they carried an underlying meaning. Don't disrupt the bigger plans. Broner claimed that he felt pressure to carry himself in a way that didn't jeopardize those plans, even if that meant not pushing certain advantages too hard. He stopped short of saying the fight was fixed, but he was blunt about believing that elements of it were influenced before the first punch was thrown. "It's not just two guys in the ring," he said. "It's networks, promoters, money. Sometimes the fight you're in ain't the only fight going on." He also revealed that in the weeks leading up to the bout, he'd heard rumors about his opponent being positioned for a title shot afterward, regardless of the outcome. Combined with the odd officiating and the constant interruptions during the fight, it left Broner convinced that the night's script didn't favor him. When asked why he didn't speak out sooner, Broner pointed to the realities of boxing politics. "You go against the machine when you're still in it, and you'll find yourself without fights, without TV dates, without a paycheck," he explained. For a fighter who grew up with nothing, walking away from big money wasn't an option at the time. So he stayed silent, took the loss, and moved on. But the bitterness never left. Looking back, Adrien Broner described that night as a turning point, not in his boxing ability, but in how he understood the sport he dedicated his life to. "I always knew boxing was a business," he said, "but that was the night I learned how cold that business can be." He admitted that in the years that followed, his trust in promoters, officials, and even some members of his own circle diminished. Broner didn't excuse his own mistakes or the controversies he created outside the ring. He acknowledged that his attitude and personal choices sometimes hurt his career as much as anything else, but he also wanted people to understand that not every loss in boxing is just about what happens between the ropes. Fans see the fight. They don't see the deals, the meetings, the calls. They don't see the hands pulling the strings. His message to young fighters was clear: know your worth, know your rights, and keep your circle tight. Because once you let the wrong people in, you're not in control anymore, they are. He warned that the same pressures he faced could befall anyone who rises too quickly without understanding the political landscape. As for whether he regrets staying silent for so long, Broner paused. "Part of me wishes I'd said something then, but maybe it's better now. Maybe somebody out there will hear this and avoid what I went through." He leaned back, almost as if unburdened, and closed with a line that summed up his entire revelation. "They didn't beat me that night. Not really. They just thought they did."